Okay. Thank you for coming. My name is Masao. I'm a indie producer in Montreal. I've been working in the games industry for about 15 years. For my first 13 years of it, I worked in AAA. I worked at Ubisoft Montreal mostly, and the last couple years, I've been working as an indie developer, also in Montreal. I co-founded a studio with my friends, and we're working on our first unannounced title to be announced and released at some later dates. I'm not sure when. Let's see. So today I'm giving a presentation on the pros and cons of working for a AAA studio versus an indie studio. I would like to start with a warning. I look like this. I'm a 40-year-old with a like I look like an anime character. So please take everything I say with a grain of salt. Everything discussed here is extremely subjective. This presentation is centered around being a worker, not an owner. So that's a whole big thing about indie, but I'm not going to go there because it's too big of a subject. These are general tendencies. Actual experience will vary differently, will vary very wildly. Your career is not binary. Many devs go back and forth between indie and AAA. This presentation will not focus on senior devs with years of experience and credits because their situation is very different. Opportunities you have are better than the ones that you don't. So let's begin. So, first thing is opportunity. So the one on the left, red is AAA and blue is indie. Um, I think one of the biggest, well, it's not really the biggest difference, but I want to start with opportunity because it's all about getting a job. Getting a job in the AAA is generally more difficult, harder to work, harder to get into with non-typical experience. Generally speaking, larger companies have kind of a standardized matrix of what they're looking for in candidates, and they tend to pick people that kind of fit into a peg really well. Um, for the most part, will require relocation. Um, yeah. Again, this most AAA studios you're going to work in office or some sort of hybrid. But yeah, most of these jobs still require relocation. Compared to that, indies, there are a lot more part-time positions. There's a lot more freelance positions, more remote position, easier get the first job. Generally speaking, depending on indie is a very wide term. There are indie studios that are essentially very well established, very well funded studios that are very picky about their employees, and then there are a group of friends that try to that are making a video game together and they have no funding. So really, like it, the range is wide. But that being said, talking to indie developers and indie studio managers, they're definitely more open to people with less experience and people who have less conventional experience. Skill development. So this is, I think, one of the main benefits of working for a AAA company instead of indie company. So if you go into a AAA studio that has large teams working on big games, there's a very good chance that there's going to be someone who's been doing your job for a very long time. And this is really valuable experience. Senior staff that can coach you is something that is really hard to find outside of certain context within this industry. There is also opportunity for specialization because you're working on a larger team. People tend to specialize on very specific things. You're not going to get someone who is like a general modeler. You're gonna have people who are like, okay, I do characters, or I do hard surface modeling like guns and other weapons. I do, I've talked to people who were vegetation experts. I've talked to people who are um, hair and feather experts. All kinds of experts exist within the AAA industry that don't in indie just because of scale and specialization. Um, Generally, larger corporations have better funded training programs. They're going to be able to afford to uh, subscribe to various different kinds of training, paid training, or even have external people coming in to give lectures. And this is fairly common in larger studios. Longer timeline to develop skills. So, because single games take longer to develop, you're going to be able to work with the same tools for an extended period of time compared to, let's say, an indie game that has a shorter development span. You're more likely to be using the same set of tools for a longer time. Less responsibility, which can be a plus or a minus, depending on what you want. Um, it's also get very easy to get pigeonholed because of the specialization. They'll say like, okay, well, you're this type of developer, and that's the only thing you can do. That can actually follow you from project to project, or even company to company. I know people who have even like, for example, if you're in an indie game development situation, you're never going to be a if you're an animator, you're gonna be an animator. Maybe you do a little bit of cinematics, maybe you do a little bit of gameplay. Nobody's gonna be like, you only specifically do touch ups and mocap. In AAA, that is definitely a thing. Again, it could be a blessing or a curse because again, it allows you to focus on developing a certain set of skills, but then again, it also closes you to other opportunities or other type of development if you're not happy with that. Um Hyper specialization. So yeah, this is exactly the same thing. I don't know why I separated those two things. But again, like I know people who do like concept art for military characters, and that's it. That's all they do. They do hyper realistic military characters that based on reality. So if you want the correct camo on with the correct kind of loadout and the right kind of guns on your character, this person is your person. They don't do anything else. He's extremely happy with that job. Other people would probably be less happy with that job. So, it's a plus or a minus. Compared to that, in the indie context, you do get a broader scope of work because, for example, our studio, we have our art team is two people. We have our art director, and then we have an artist that we just hired, which means that anything that is art in the game is handled by these two people, which means, you know, modeling, texturing, uh, shaders, you name it, is handled by these two people. Whereas in a AAA company, you are not allowed. I mean, let's focus on level art. If you are a level artist, um, chances are you're not doing modeling, you're not doing texturing, you're certainly not touching shaders. Your primary job is mostly placement and possibly doing some modeling of things like ground and walls. Um, you're probably not even touching lighting as well. So, but then again, there are AAA places that work a little bit differently. There are places where you basically get a very small part of the stage and then you do everything. But those are, I think, generally less common. Um, you're also less likely to have coaches. You kind of have to figure it out. If you're in a studio where you are the sole animator or you're the sole um, programmer, sole game designer, you kind of have to figure things out on your own. You can talk to your team, you can work together, but your development and um, your problem solving really needs to come from you or some external source that you probably cultivate yourself rather than given by the company. Um, Generally speaking, indie companies are smaller and therefore have less robust training programs. If they are financially successful, they are able to pay for different kinds of training programs, but there is definitely an economy to scale. How much training you can offer with around the same amount of money per person at a 3,000 person studio is not the same as what you can offer at a four-person studio. Um, it's just the reality. Shorter timelines. Generally, indie games are made in shorter timelines, and that is good in one sense because you're going to have more, where you can finish a game, and that's generally a good thing. But again, you don't have the longer timeline to develop very specialized skills. You can also kind of fall into this jack of all trades situation. So basically, you're very good at a bunch of stuff, but you're not necessarily the best in the industry for very specialized skills. Again, this is going to open you up to certain types of opportunities and close the doors to other kinds of opportunities. It's not a good or bad, it's just kind of the reality. Toxic workspace and diversity and inclusion. I'm sure you've heard, and I'm sure you have probably in one way or the other experienced some of the nonsense within this industry that can be at times a dumpster fire. This slide, I did not want to separate into AAA and indie because, contrary to what Twitter might tell you, indie is not like some kind of haven for toxic behavior. Ch- um, there are good studios and bad studios of any size. Toxic behavior can found everywhere, AAA or indie. So you really need to make sure to do research on the studio carefully and talk to former and current employees before taking positions to really know what you're getting yourself into. Um, I think the difference in a like how toxicity can manifest itself in a larger AAA studio tends to be things like more like systemic systemic problems where if you don't fit into the majority of the people developing there, you have a more difficult time in advancement or opportunity for certain types of roles. Um, or and in and obviously you can also come across individual bad actors, but individual bad actors are kind of everywhere. Theoretically, in a larger studio you should have an HR organization or HR structure that should help you with that, but as you've seen in the news, sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. um Indie, in contrast, is if you are unfortunate enough to come across a toxic person in indie, the likelihood, and especially if that person is higher in the structure, if they are part owners, if they are co-founders, it's going to be very difficult for the company to deal with them because not only do they serve a large role in the company and have a lot of ties with the people who are controlling the company. They also have things like shares and votes on the board, and these all make things much more difficult to extract that person. So, yeah, unfortunately, if you come across bad people, you're going to do that in regardless of scale of the company. Other considerations, generally speaking, AAA does pay better. This is not 100% the rule, and but this is the general consensus. They also tend to offer better benefits because they are a larger company and they can afford to do so. AAA credits on your CV is huge. The difference in terms of how many recruiters are going to reach out to you with similar type of experience in indie and AAA is pretty clear that I mean, if that is something that is a focus for you, AAA credits are going to go further, even with the same amount of experience than indie. you're also going to be able to develop more connections. This is, I mean, purely at work, and this is just a matter of scale. You know, if you're working on a project that has 500 people, you have an opportunity to talk to 500 people at work. That's very different than, you know, working on a project that has 20 people. Obviously, you can augment this with, you know, going to various different kinds of events, connecting with people on social media and internet in general. But yeah, it does mean making more connections that will have long term impact on your career. Generally speaking, AAA companies tend to be more stable. Big asterisk is depending on where you work for and if they do a lot of contractor hires or a lot of layoffs, then that's a separate thing. Yeah, but generally speaking, AAA does have more job stability. It does. Almost all AAA companies have exclusivity contracts, which means that you cannot work on anything other than what you're getting paid to do. Some of the contracts are more harsh than others, but sometimes they even say that any work that you do, even on off hours, they have rights to your intellectual property. So yeah, that um, it's also it's harder to showcase your personal work when you work on a project that has 500 people. Pointing to be able to point to saying this is the part that I did can be difficult depending on what your job is. Whereas if you're working on a smaller studio, that's less of an issue. Um, indie, some consideration for working in indie is that remote work is available. Um, Increasingly, that is something that a lot of people are asking for, and it is clear that indie studios are looking more flexible than a lot of the AAA opportunities that are out there. Um, Most indie studios, but not all, will allow you to work on your own projects on the side and keep your intellectual property. Um, Generally, there's more diversity in genre and subject. And in also my experience, I think there is more diversity in the people that work there. It's easier to showcase your work if you are on a smaller team because more of your game is exclusively done by you. And generally speaking, it is a more welcoming community. Like AAA is not a very warm and welcoming place for people who are trying to get into the industry. A lot of recruiters are not interested in talking to students or people who don't have very much experience. And people who currently work there really don't know how to really help you because it's quite complicated in terms of how you get a job at a AAA company because you have large recruiting HR teams. So consequently, it becomes something that is more closed off. And that's it. That's my presentation.
All right.
Um,
Thank you so much for that, Masao. That was pretty informative and excellent. Just going to ask if anybody has any questions. They are free to ask them vocally or type them out in the chat. I think we have about 10 or 15 minutes. Is that time span okay for you, Masao?
yeah.
Yeah. So we have about 15 minutes of questions. So fire away. I think I
I have a
posted one
question.
about. Go ahead.
Hello. I don't even know if I changed my name on here. Anyway, okay. Um, Masao, you talked about AAA and indie as being two very discrete sort of entities, but can you speak at all to the sort of cross
Yes.
pollination and flow back and forth that it seems like some people have in their careers?
Okay. So
I promise I'm not a plant.
So yes, so there's different ways of defining indie. I think from a video game standpoint, a lot of times the definition of an indie is an aesthetic. Um, so even if it's made by a large corporation that has backing of even larger corporation, that game is still considered indie. In this context, I mean indie as a independent, um, uh, as a economic entity. I'm talking about smaller scale game development studios that are not owned by larger corporations. So that's I think a distinction that I want to make. Like for example, to give you an example, there are companies like Moon Studio that made Ori and the Ori series. They're technically speaking, independent studio, but they have about, I mean, a little bit short of 100 people working on their games, and they're very well funded with backing of
Oh,
uh, even more money.
wow.
So I don't know where I was going with this. Oh, okay. That being said, as I said in the beginning, people do go back and forth. I know a lot of people who started off in indie, work in AAA, go back to working in indie, and vice versa. It is not something. It's certainly not like a career path where you're like, soon as soon as you chose one, that's the only place you're going to be able to work. Um, yeah, and depending on the type of work that you do, I know a lot of people who are freelancers, and especially people who are kind of more advanced in their career, especially positions like writers. I know people who actually concurrently work for AAA companies and independent companies at the same time. So it's never generally completely clear cut in the way that that I presented it. That being said, majority of people do have, and I'm majority of the people who have a job, like a 9 to 5 job, regardless of whether or not it's indie or AAA, they tend to work for one studio. So that's really the kind of the perspective I presented here. But again, that's that's not. There's a lot of different kinds of ways to work in this industry, and yeah, that should all be taken with a grain of salt. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Excellent. So if you check the Crash Course chat, you should see
Oh, okay.
a bunch of questions that
Let's
have,
see.
yeah.
Question. Um, Exclusivity contracts usually tied to role, or is it cross disciplinary? Most exclusivity contracts that I've seen at AAA companies are basically anything you do. So it doesn't matter if you're a programmer and you want to write a video game on your side. Um, I'd imagine if it's not a video game, it's going to be easier. Some companies are more open than others. I've definitely seen companies where they say things like, you have to present your project to us, and if it's not something that directly competes with one of our games, we will allow it as long as you don't make beyond a certain amount. I've also seen companies where they say, like, we don't care, everything you do belongs to us. I've also seen companies saying, like, well, if you want to do your own thing, that's fine. However, if you are looking for a publisher, you have to come to us first, and we have the right of first refusal. So it really depends. And but generally speaking, it's not specific to discipline. It's much more about employment status. Let's see. Which do I prefer, AAA or indie, and why? I worked in AAA for a long time and went indie. So currently in my career, that's where I want to be. But for a very long time, AAA was the right place for me. I'm a producer. I do production management. Um, for someone who wants to specialize in that, AAA is much more interesting because managing a larger team, managing parts on a larger team is much more managey than a smaller team. Like right now, my job is to manage the team, but I also manage the studio. I also do biz dev. I also do a bunch of other stuff. I like it, but there's if you asked me like 5 years ago, do I want to do biz dev? Do I want to manage a business? I would have said like, no, that's not what I wanted to do. I want to learn how to manage a large team and you know make a complicated and uh, complicated piece of art. And that was definitely what I wanted to do. So right now, I'm happy in indie, but I don't necessarily think that it really depends on the person. I don't think that one is better than the other. CV, what do you exactly mean? What exactly when mentioned credits for CV? CV is curriculum vitae. It's the resume. So basically, when you're talking about your work experience, when you have if you have in your resume that you worked on Assassin's Creed for 2 years, it's generally going to open more doors than if you worked on a small indie mobile title, for example. It's kind of shitty, but it is the reality. Can you expand on the recruiter aspect? What does a recruiter do? How do you get on their radar? So a recruiter is someone who recruits. They can work for a company or, well, I mean, they all work for somebody, but they can work for the studio directly, or they can be working for a external recruiting agency. And basically, what they do is they send messages to people on LinkedIn and ask them if they're interested in different kinds of opportunities. They also go to different events and basically try to headhunt. There are generally people who are looking for people with experience because they're there to kind of fulfill positions that are harder to fill. So junior positions are easy to fill and they're filled locally. So that's why recruiters tend to focus on senior positions, director positions. Yeah, because their salary needs to be paid, especially if they're an external recruiter. They're not cheap, so the company has to really think that it's worth it to pay these people to find hard to get talent. Um, how do you get their attention? I don't really know, other than networking events, and there's also I think they're very resume driven because the thing is if you talk to a recruiter and they think you're cool, but um the company that they're hiring for says that they need someone with AAA experience, 5 years of AAA shooter experience. Um, it's not really going to help them that the recruiter thinks that you're cool. So, um, how do you get on their radar is really to become more senior, which is, I know, a terrible answer, but I'm pretty sure that's generally how they work. How important is it to have links in the industry?
I think that's a
It
networking
is.
question.
So, how important is having links in the industry? How you personally seen capable and deserving people get jobs just because they knew someone? This is generally speaking, that's how you get jobs in this industry. People recommend people they worked with. So it's extremely important to cultivate a network. because these are the people who are going to give you references. um, it's the thing is, especially on a larger AAA project that has lots and lots of people, it's very difficult to pinpoint what your contribution was. So that means that that person, or the person that's hiring you, really needs to take a gamble on, okay, so you worked on Call of Duty, so you must be good. But in reality, that's not a very good barometer of what you can or can't do. So if there's somebody that already works there and says, "Yes, I worked with Glenn. Glenn is really great. He's really well organized." Then that's going to go a very long way compared to uh, if you're just a LinkedIn profile. Unfortunately, yeah, and freelancing too. Like if you want to get freelancing work, like it's people who are familiar with the type of work you've done in the past makes a huge difference in getting new contracts because maybe you personally, like for example, we all have networks, right? So like for example, I run a Discord for indie producers. So I'm like, if I'm like, okay, I need a freelance programmer, I'm going to first reach out to all the people that I think that I know that I've worked with. If that doesn't work out, what I'm going to do is ask my fellow producers that I trust, hey, is there anybody that you've worked with before that you think is really great? And then I'm going to reach out to them. So that's kind of how a lot of times people get contracts. That being said, if you can't fill it like that, then you are going to, go through the more kind of conventional channel of, hey, this is a job post. Please send your resume and your portfolio, and you look at it, and then you hire people. But generally speaking, you prefer to do the former rather than the later. How does my workflow differ between AAA and indie? Um, this is a very difficult question because even in AAA, like management styles and tools and creative process is very different depending on the type of team that you manage. Like, for example, in my case, the last few projects that I managed was the last team I managed was a UI team that had like 20-ish people locally and another 10-ish people that we were working offsite. Um, so that was very different than the previous team that I managed, which was a character modeling and animation team. So that whole team was about 10 people, and we were working on shipping character models and animations associated to character models. So that was yeah, like the pipeline's very different. The tools that you want to use are very different. Yeah, I think part of the deal with becoming a manager in this industry is that you need to have a lot of tools in your little toolbox and bring out the right tool when it's the right time. And even on the same project, like if you're at a conception or prototyping stage, the way that you manage that team is very different than like when you're in production and when you're closing. So every day is really different for management, and if you're talking specifically about software, I have used Jira in pretty much everything. And even after I went indie, I decided to stay with Jira because it's what I know. That being said, the same stuff can be done on different types of software, and yeah. How does testing and QA in general differ in AAA and indie? It's really the biggest difference is scale. If you have a larger team, you're putting in a lot of things in your game simultaneously. So the way that things break is very different than if you have 5 people who talk to each other all the time. Um, Yeah, I think that's really the biggest difference in the approach in QA. Like you need to have fleets of people testing things at all times when you have hundreds of people jamming data and code into the same big file in a way that you don't have to worry about when you only have like 5 people working together. That being said, you still do have to test. I'm not saying that indie games don't need to be tested, and especially if you have a multiplayer game, like it's very important to have you know, uh, continual, ongoing testing, etc. I don't think it should be the last. QA, the last line of defense. I don't think. I think that approach is bad. I think they should be there from the beginning. I think we treat QA as the last line of defense, and I think it informs a lot of our production processes. I think QA should be involved from the beginning, and we should be making features that are easier to test and easier to verify. So yeah, I mean, yes, ultimately they are the guard at the end, but I do think that they should be considered much more part of the entirety of the process. Dev feedback loop. Yes. Boo Jira. Jira is great. I will not hear slander of Jira. It's just really cumbersome.
Seriously?
Any more questions? Did I miss anything? Oh, I skipped this one? What are the tips if you want to become an indie freelance game programmer? And would I have to do something in addition to programming to be successful in that field? Okay. So, I mean, no, yes. Obviously, if you want to be a programmer, I think you should program. If you want to be successful as a freelancer, however, you do need to network, and you also need to know how your code fits into others. You really, I think, the most important thing is for like the difference between like a freelancer and a employee is the fact that you have to go and get your jobs, and I think that's really that's that's really what you have to do other than program. You have to be able to get those jobs. Getting those jobs means knowing people and them knowing what you can do. So, collaborative projects, yeah, I th collaborative projects, the first collaborative projects can be things like game jams or, different kinds of, like, contests. People are always looking for programmers. Generally speaking, um, if you can program, people wanna work with you. So, really what you have to do is get out there and get, no, let people know that you're available and you can do stuff. I think that's really the big thing. If you're going into AAA, but they use a completely different game engine you normally use, would they still accept you and allow you to learn as you work? Yes. So a lot of AAA studios have in-house engines that are not accessible to anybody who doesn't work in that company. So yeah, their assumption is that you have no idea how to use their tools, which um yeah, so that's the case. I mean, you do get people who are like, yes, we're an Unreal type studio, and we want people with Unreal experience.
Mhm.
But a lot of studios are looking for people who can really demonstrate that they can do the work, regardless of the platform. And um, teaching somebody a new platform is much easier than teaching somebody how to do the job from scratch. So obviously they're looking for if your portfolio really shows that you can do something, whatever your discipline is, that's definitely um yeah, that's definitely gonna help. What do you mean, like making a website? Like your own website?
I think Leo is asking for like, examples of non-gaming programming projects.
Oh no, I don't mean non-gaming work outside of useful. No, I don't mean work outside of video. Oh, okay. Um. Oh, so you mean like doing programming work outside the video games industry?
Kind of showcase to build that portfolio.
Um, I think it really depends. Like, there's different kinds of programmers, and there are types of people who work in the games industry that are not technically speaking video game programmers. Online programmers are essentially, I mean, they do online stuff. They're not even looking. They're not, they're taking variables and then interfacing with online structures like uh Amazon and Microsoft stuff. So like if that's the kind of stuff you want to do, then yeah, like having worked on like a large back end of you know, of a website definitely works. But if you want to be a gameplay programmer, which is like someone who makes like gameplay stuff, then that needs to you do kind of have to show that that's what you can do. Um so yeah, it really depends on the type of programming that you want to do and how you can demonstrate that you can do that job. Um, if your type of programming can be demonstrated outside of the games industry, then that's fine. If your type of programming that you want to do can't be demonstrated outside of the video games context, then like it's going to be harder to convince people that that's something you can do. Ultimately, it's you have to like getting a job is very much like selling you as a product. Like you're the salesman and you're like, "Hey, this is what I'm offering. Do you want to buy it?" So, you have to look at it from the perspective of the buyer, which is in this case an employer, whether or not it's freelance or a full-time position. Like they are looking for someone who can do X, Y, and Z. Like, can you demonstrate that you can do X, Y, and Z? I think that's really what you want to focus on. Although I'm not a programmer, so you should probably ask people like Mandisa.
I'll just chime in on that since I got called out. Um, if you focus on the areas that a like Masao said can demonstrate your work, and b demonstrate that you can follow instructions, work in a team, take a project to completion. Those kinds of skills carry over, um, cross industry.
I think is that it? Did I miss any questions?
I do not think you did. I think that touched on everything actually. And I think we're also almost out of time. So I'm gonna ask like for final call for any questions, anything you want to know before Marcel leaves us. Going once, going twice. That's it. Thanks again, Marcel. It was super
Thank you.
informative. I
Thank
think
you
for
for the
everyone.
opportunity.
Uh,
And
right.
best of luck out there. It's not easy. Um regardless of it does get easier with experience, but it's still a difficult industry. So please don't be too hard on yourself. I think that's my parting words.